Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I am your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 12, an exclusive interview with the one and only, the legendary Mr. Ross Levine. Now, we're not going to hesitate any today. Ross is actually already on right now, so we're just going to go ahead and dive straight into it. Ross, how's it going today, man?
It's going good, Jackson. I appreciate you making the time. I know you woke up early out in California to have me on here, so I appreciate that.
Absolutely, you're a busy guy.
I'm trying to make everything work, man, but I had to make time for you. I'm just, before we get into this, super proud of everything that you've accomplished in the sport. I remember watching you as a real little kid back when I was training every once in a while with Lauren and Becca, that whole crew down in Florida, and your name always popped up. So I got to watch you from the very beginning, and just really proud of like what you've become as a martial artist, and then all the things that you're doing to make the sport grow. It's coming from the heart, man. I appreciate you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ross. I mean, that means the world to me. Anybody that listens to the podcast regularly knows that you're a huge inspiration for me. The excellence that you're able to achieve in point fighting is one thing, and that's something that I saw the most of in my competitive career. But going back and watching the videos, and you were still doing bow forms early on in my competitive career, a lot of people don't get the level of innovation that guys like you and Nate Andrade, who were training partners from what I understand, you guys had a huge impact on bow staff in particular. Some of the tricks that came out and things like that, being able to be that creative with the tricks and not doing releases. All of you guys' creativity was with body rolls, which was, just a whole nother level of innovation and how cool that is. So that means a great deal coming from you, and I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We're kind of going to jump right into it. A little bit of an overview for those of you that may not know as much about Ross. Like I said, he's considered to be one of the greatest point fighters to ever live. In my opinion, he's somebody that's definitely in that top 10, maybe even in the top 5 on that list. It's hard to say with different eras and everything, because you've got the Ray era, and then you compare it to guys like Kevin Thompson, who did so many different things well, and it's just like it's almost impossible to try to be completely fair when making those type of lists. But on a podcast, that's what you have to do sometimes.
I agree, man. It's tough. I think when a lot of people started coming out with these, make you top 10, make you top 5, whatever. Just the fact that I was even in the conversation is a feather in my cap. I never got into this to be like, I want to be the greatest ever. Because I know that conversation is never going to be, it's never going to be answered, and it's certainly never going to end, because there's always, or there should always be someone coming behind you looking to smash those records. So, at the moment, I personally still consider, Raymond, because he's the one that I saw growing up the most and then had to fight him all the time. So, he certainly has a winning record over me. He got me since I was 18, or 16 actually. But yeah, I mean the great Nasty Anderson, Kevin Thompson. I mean all these guys, unfortunately, who are no longer with us. But they've left a huge legacy for anyone to fill their shoes. So I'm just glad to be in that conversation, and the fact that people will look at me and what I've done in the sport and use that to grow is really cool.
That's an awesome take, man. That's really cool. So speaking of records, right? All-time leader in Warrior Cup wins, 9, right?
9, yeah.
9.
Although I'm sure you must be catching up to me by now.
I've got 7, so who knows if by the time that I'm off to med school, if I'll be able to get there. But no, that's totally cool with me if you hold on to that record. So all-time leader in Warrior Cup wins, professional kickboxer for Glory Kickboxing, just won Knockout of the Year for 2019, which was awesome. So congratulations on that. So that's just a little overview of some of your accomplishments. So now let's throw it all the way back. Take us through kind of the generic martial arts interview question. What's your story? How did you get started? What's the Ross Levine origin story?
So most people that grew up in my generation, like my age group, knew that I have an older brother. Some people don't know that I have an older brother. He exists. He's really still alive, doing everything well. He's only 2 years older than me, and he's actually a cardiologist. So if you have medical questions, talk to my brother.
Wow.
So he actually started martial arts before I did, and I had no intention, no desire to do martial arts. The thought of standing still and have someone tell me what to do was not in my vocabulary, not on my radar. My brother would take class, and I would rollerblade up and down the block until his class was over. Until one day he went to an inter-school tournament that I didn't go to. And when he came home, he had a nice, bright, shiny trophy. So when he went to sleep, I took his trophy and put it by my bed because I wanted it. So I guess I got into martial arts for all the wrong reasons. But it stuck with me. I was just always really competitive. Always wanted to win whatever I was doing, whether it was playing video games or being out, hanging out with my friends or whatever it was. I just wanted to be really, really good at it. So I think that jump started me to want to get into martial arts because I knew there was rewards at the end of it. I was a very reward-driven person. So I started then and then worked my way up. I was 7 years old when I started. By the age of 13, I started competing a little bit more, going to even national events. Funny story, my very first open tournament was something called the Empire State Nationals, which doesn't exist anymore, but used to be in Stony Brook. I was an underbelt, and the center referee for my forms competition was Muhammad Jahan Vash. So just totally crazy. I don't know why that sticks out in my head, but it does. And we still joke about it now. Yeah, and then it just kind of blossomed from there. I started competing a lot more on like the national scene when I was about 15, 16, and just kind of carried my way into adulthood, and here we are now.
That's awesome. It's actually kind of funny. I remember a somewhat similar origin story. I don't have an older brother that competed or anything, but I remember I started when I was 6, started competing when I was 7, and I remember going to my first tournament, which was a small inter-school tournament that didn't mean anything, and I really wasn't very good. I was like a green belt, and I was horrible when I was a green belt.
Yeah.
But because there was just nobody else, I won 2 out of my 3 divisions, and so got 2 of the 6-foot trophies or whatever, and I was like, all right, I'm hooked. I'm staying. But anyway, that's really cool. So, talking about family a little bit, somebody that I've always seen around karate tournaments, been judged by him many times, is your dad, right? And so I know he's been involved in the sport and certainly had to have been involved in your journey. So tell us a little bit about the role that he played as a coach, as somebody that inspired you, whatever that relationship was.
Yeah, so my dad was a longtime martial artist as well. Studied Taekwondo and did some kickboxing of his own. When he was younger, fought in the streets a lot. You know, he did it all. He did it all. He was the original bare knuckle brawler. But so growing up doing martial arts, my brother and I started martial arts. He put us in with the son, I believe the eldest son of the person that he got his black belt from. So it was Kang System Taekwondo in New York. So we started with pretty much the same system. So everyone, my dad knew and he was comfortable. He was, sure that we were going to get the right martial arts training there. And he was 100% correct. So he kind of introduced us to these people and then, would always make us do stuff I shouldn't say make, but we were always trying to jump around and practice and do stuff in the living room. So he would sit with us and, correct us and say, do it this way, do it that way. So we got double duty on the teaching, which a lot of people don't like and don't respond well to. But I think my brother and I were so focused and so eager to learn and do it right that I never had a problem Dad, stop coaching me or whatever. So it was always a pretty good relationship until I got older. So when I was young, it was good. But as I got older, I was like, all right, leave me alone. Let me figure it out by myself. I think the unsung hero of it all is actually my mom. Everybody sees and knows my dad because he's in the circuit a little bit more. He's in a little deeper when he's, judging and people see his face and he's always there and everyone knows him as Ross's dad and all that. But my mom was on every single one of those road trips where we would wake up at 4:00 in the morning and drive 5 hours down to DC for a local tournament and drive right back and, pack up my gear and all that stuff. So she would score keep. And man, it was great. Both of my parents were incredibly influential in just showing what the love of a parent can do and how meaningful it is for a child who's, impressionable and, you think about, all right, what could I have been doing on those Saturdays? Yeah, I could have been hanging out with my friends or I could have been doing something else. But my parents both recognized the importance of being driven and being focused and sacrificing. And where I was sacrificing in my personal life, they were sacrificing their time, their weekends, their personal life, their marriage, just to be the best possible parent and help me to be successful, whatever that may have been. So yeah, both of my parents, man, were tremendously influential in getting me up and around and getting to these tournaments, and they enjoyed it just as much as I did, I think.
That's awesome. It's like I know your dad mostly as a judge. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like I always knew him as Ross's dad, kind of like you were saying. But then as a judge, one of the things that I found was like how much of a stickler he is, right? So he's very detail oriented. It's like everything he's gonna catch. If you've got a back leg bent or anything, and I think it showed in your performances, right? Is that type of mentality where it was like every little thing that he saw. He wanted to make sure it was right. Reminds me a lot of how my dad is. Now, my dad doesn't have any type of a sport karate background. But
you might as well, though.
Can be just as stubborn, right?
Sure, yeah.
And then talking about the role of your mom and all that, that's just super cool. So thank you for sharing that. Now, to get things out of the family and kind of move into the sport karate realm as a whole, let's talk a little bit about competitors. Just talk about competitors that inspired you, that you were looking at as you were coming up, competitors that may have had a big impact on your career, whether because, maybe they were some of your coaches or maybe you fought them and they were some of your best rivals. Just any competitors that you want to talk about that inspired you and helped you become the Ross Levine that we all know.
Yeah. As a kid, I was actually really, really into forms too, forms and weapons. Most people didn't really see me compete as a forms guy. I did a lot of traditional as a junior, and then I left that as I turned into an adult, simply because I needed to specialize a little bit more. But as a kid, growing up, I watched a lot of, obviously, Nate Andrade, who became my coach and very, very good friend for weapons work. But I really looked up to Casey Marks, Mike Bernardo, John Valera, Arnold Chan, Jimmy Pham. These were guys that were competing when I was a kid, like just looking up at the stage and like these are the people I was seeing. And then even like David Douglas, so many people. Anthony DeMarco. I mean, I'm really throwing it back now. But yeah, and then going a little bit further, then seeing guys like Steve Tirada, just talking about like the forms divisions, Daniel Sterling, man, it was just so stacked all the time, and like the competitiveness was crazy back then. So those are some of the people that I looked up to, early on. And I wasn't really watching a lot of the fighting, which was kind of crazy to hear. Mm-hmm. But I didn't get to watch like the Pedros, the Bradys. I didn't watch that generation of fighters until later when I got a hold of a couple of Jotti's tapes. And then I started watching online and becoming more driven into fighting. That I started watching those guys and studying and going back and learning and things like that. And the more I was exposed to that community, the more I started challenging myself and watching a little bit more. But yeah, those are some of the guys that kind of attracted me to the higher level of sport, just because of their passion, their energy, and just watching them compete. So it was really cool watching those guys.
That's awesome. You say something interesting there to get sidetracked for a second. You mentioned the competitiveness of that generation. Is that something that you contrast with the current generation? Because I know like right now, especially in like the junior forms and weapons divisions, we've got a lot of depth and we've got a lot of parity. But I see what you're talking about where it's like when I was coming up even, I remember like when it was time to compete, not wanting to talk to anybody, I was nobody's friend. Like, I was there to try to beat everybody. And, like, now it's like I see kids before their division hanging out, joking 10 minutes before they run a form on Instagram, TikTok, or whatever. And it's not the same. It doesn't seem like and certainly there's exceptions. There's kids that still get in the zone and everything. But what's kind of your take on that? What kind of differences do you notice? What makes the competitiveness of that generation that you mentioned stand out?
I think back then there was more on the line for them. There's more notoriety behind it. These guys didn't have anything else to look forward to. It wasn't like, all right, if I nail this form, well, maybe someone's going to watch me and I could get into a movie or a TV script or something like that. These guys were just martial artists, and they were like, I am going to be the best, and if I don't win this tournament, I'm not the best. And that was it. So it was like there was no time for oh yeah, what are we doing later? Let's go hang out, or like, how was your weekend? Like, no one cared. It was just these guys went home and they trained all the time, and they were always trying to be innovative. Like back then, God, the stuff that I see like little kids do now. Sometimes I'll just go and when I do get a chance to be at a tournament, I like watching some of the younger divisions, like even the 10 and 11, 12 and 13 black belts. Do their forms, and it's like some of the kicks and tricks that these kids are doing, like, oh my god, like adults weren't even dreaming of doing stuff like that when they were in their mid-20s, like at the peak of their career. Like I remember the first time David Douglas did a butterfly twist and everyone was like, oh my god, this is the craziest thing ever. And now, like, if you can't do that, it's like, what are you even doing? Right? Are you even a martial artist? Like, what's the matter with you? So I think it was I came into the sport at a really cool time because I've seen it evolve so much. So I think that's where the competitive nature came from. It was still so early and so raw that everyone was just trying to be the next big thing. Where now it's like you look across a martial arts room and like, God, everyone is so special, is like such a specialist. I mean, you see you doing your bow form, and then you see like Reed with the double bow, Cole with his commas. I mean, Rashad Eugene is doing everything. Back then, even when I was competing, it was like I was doing bow, Kalman did sword, Mark did commas, Matt did chucks, and that was it. And there was a couple others like in between, but you saw like one at a time, like all of us do something uniquely different. And now it's like everybody can do everything. So I think just the evolution of the sport in general is what controlled that kind of that nature of just being like almost borderline like conflict into competition, which was cool to watch.
Yeah, that's a really cool perspective. It's funny you bring up, like, just listening to you talk about competing against Matt, Mark, Kalman. It's insane. That was something that, like, when my time in the adult division was probably the deepest as it's ever been. When Reed was doing the double bow, Cole with his commas, Tyler Weaver with commas, and then of course Danny Etkin, guys like that coming up into the division. That's what we always wanted to be. We always wanted to have somebody be the Kalman, have somebody be the Matt, somebody the Ross, somebody the Rudy, somebody the Mark, and try to have that type of a competitive relationship. And if we ever got there, who knows? I mean, we'll figure that out later on. But yeah, that's one thing that I always tell people is because, like, especially school owners and stuff, it's interesting. A lot of school owners that have me out for seminars just so happen to have also had, like, Kalman out or Matt out. And one of the common questions I get is, like, you think you could have beat him? And I'm like, it's just different. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's like the things that, Kalman was doing with sword throws in 2009, stuff like that. 2009 is also the year that you won your diamond ring, right, in weapons?
I believe so. 2009, 2011.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I won weapons and it might have been 11. I got to double check on that.
Wait, you have 2 weapons diamond rings?
I have two fighting rings.
2 fighting rings, but you have 1 in weapons, don't you?
1 in weapons.
Yeah, okay.
I want to say it was 2011, but I'm not 100% on that.
Okay. Either way.
Call Alex Dingman. He knows everything about that.
But anyway, yes, that's just it's interesting. First of all, the contrast between those 2 eras and trying to compare them, because it's really hard to, because like you said, it's like, back in the 90s, when Mike Chat was doing the first backflip and Carmichael Simon was doing the first 720, that was ridiculous. And now those are like standard moves that if you don't do it in extreme form, it's totally different.
Some of those don't even get performed anymore because they're too old.
Right. But anyway, so you mentioned, so far you've been talking a lot about forms and weapons, and I think that most people know you as a fighter, whether it's as the point fighter for those of us that were around for the majority of your point fighting career, or people that are newer to the scene seeing you as a pro kickboxer. That's the perception a lot of people have, is that you're a fighter. But what a lot of people don't know is how much of an impact you had on particularly the weapons divisions, and not just you, but also in coordination with Nate Andre, who you said was your coach. So tell us a little bit about what started some of that? So like you were big in innovating body rolls. Basically, like I always tell people when I teach seminars, private lessons, like anytime you do like a shoulder neck roll, which I think you guys called a sunset, anytime you guys do what we call today a reload, I think Nate calls it a reload too. I'm not sure what your terminology is, but going like from the hip, rolling across the chest up to the shoulder, right?
Yeah.
Anything like that is from you guys. So tell us a little bit about how that got started, maybe some cool stories from those training sessions with Nate. Get into that a little bit.
Yeah, so the first time I saw Nate was I can't remember the year. It had to be very, very early 2000s, maybe even 2000 at the New England Open. And I was watching the men's weapons divisions because I was watching, Daniel Sterling and a lot of the other guys who I recognized all the time. And then this giant of a person let out this like monstrous roar, and I was like, "Oh my God, this guy's about to do a bow form. I hope it's good, right?" Because you see someone that big, and it's like you never know what you're gonna get. And then everything he did just totally blew me away. It's like the first time he did that opening spin sequence, which I've used in my form pretty much my whole career, like behind the back, around the neck swing. He's so big that everyone was like, had to back up from the ring when he did it. And then he was just so fast, so powerful. And the stuff he did with the bow was nuts. So I was like, man, that guy's awesome. Like, I got to find a way to train with him. When my brother was visiting different colleges, we were up in Mass, and my dad had gotten in touch with Nate, and he was like, all right, I'm going to drive you. You're going to go train with Nate today. So my dad drove me like 2 hours. He dropped me off at Nate. I was there pretty much all day. He went and like looked at schools with my brother, and then came back for me. And that first session was brutal. But Nate used to beat the hell out of me in training. But a lot of the stuff, so our friendship started with that. And then I would go up, I would take the bus from New York, a couple hours, three and a half hours, just ride the bus. He'd pick me up. I'd stay with him and his mom, and Justin Eaton would come down, Mike Baker would come up. So like there was a lot of bow competitors in the area too that we'd all get together and train and bounce ideas off of each other. But all credit goes to Nate. People don't really understand. I didn't come up with anything. I'm 100% honest with that. I did not invent a damn thing. Nate is the one who kind of put all that stuff in my brain, and I was the one who was like, all right, I can fit it here in my form, or I can fit it there. I can make it work in this combination. So they may have seen me do it before they saw anyone else do it, but it was all 100% Nate. Nothing was invented by me. So I just want to clear the air on that. I appreciate all the love, but I'm going to dump it right back on Nate because he's the one that deserves it. And a lot of the stuff that he learned and innovated were actually moves from like a spear-related weaponry. Like all of the body rolls and manipulations are actually, if you were to like put tape around one end of a bow, like the next time you practice, take like red tape it around one end of your bow and make believe that is like the spearhead, right? And now you're doing all of your strikes with the spearhead forward. You do a body roll, and when you grab, now the spear end is on the different side, so you're striking with the blunt end, cutting with the other end. All of the moves like the voodoo child, like that manipulation, is a stab, right? Mm-hmm. So knowing where the spear end is at all times, it's actually really cool. So if you toy around with stuff like that, I mean, as creative as you are, I bet you'd be able to come up with some cool stuff too. But yeah, that's kind of where it came from, and I think I became a little bit more popular with it. I always think Nate just never got the credit. I think people saw him as someone who was super tall. It came off, because he was so tall, the body manipulation came off a little slower. So people couldn't appreciate the difficulty of what he was doing. And then like by the time that he really started getting involved in the sport, life changes happen, and he had to, didn't have to, but he chose to move. He went down to Atlanta. He pursued like doing stunts and things like that. And now he's doing amazing. Like he's traveling all over. He's in big time movies. So I think where my come up happened is when Nate started falling off, and then people were like, oh my God, this guy's doing all this stuff, but it's faster. It's just because I'm smaller. I'm not 6'8". If I was 6'8", it'd be the same as him. So I think he just really never got the credit, and people couldn't appreciate what he was doing until they saw me do it.
And that's exactly what I was about to say, is that it's like, it seems like, because I was somebody that got to see kind of the tail end of Nate's career when I was first starting. I actually have a funny Nate story that I'll share. But what was interesting was, like, it's a theme in sport karate. It's like there's always the role of the inventor, and then typically the popularizer is a separate role. And so it's like with me watching Nate, I always wonder the same thing. It's like I could watch Nate and I could see clearly the intricacies of everything that he was doing and how skilled he was, but then you wouldn't see him as often make it to nighttime finals, things like that. And I think I think very much in sport karate you have to have a certain look. There's a stereotyped look of like what a quote unquote winner looks like. And when you're 6'8", and you know, when you do things unique like yelling "it's showtime" before you run a form, it's part of what made him great. It's part of what will make him remembered. But for whatever reason, judges just didn't respect it at the time or whatever. So. But anyway, so get kind of going a little bit deeper into that, because I actually didn't realize that was new information to me. The fact that it was like all Nate, and as far as like inventing stuff, you weren't as much of an inventor, but you popularized it. So you were the guy that was able to have some more success with it, getting to the nighttime finals, things like that, so that people saw these moves. Do you have a favorite? Do you have a particular one that it's like... I don't know, one that stands out, one that was always a go-to in your forms?
I mean, when I was in dire need of a victory, I think that straight jacket voodoo child would come out, and that was something that I don't think anyone has ever done, at least in the way that I was doing it, or the way that Nate was doing it. I believe I was the first one to do the anti-gravity, or what you're calling the reload, in competition. So I think that's why people were like, "Oh, he invented that." But no, I just was the first one to have enough cojones to do it in my form. Say, all right, well, screw it, I'm going to do it. But yeah, I think also what helped me become more popular doing those moves was the separation of bladed and unbladed. So when going back to like Nate's career, he was dealing with all those guys in one division. You know, so not having the ability to separate the high flying, like extreme versus creative, like he didn't have all that. It was open weapons, it was traditional weapons, and everything was together. So later on in my career, when I started doing all the crazy stuff, it was really because we had unbladed and bladed. So those guys could do all their cuts and their flips and all that in some other division. And then you had the non-bladed division, and it wasn't as stacked of a division. So people could see the disparity between the stuff that I was doing and the stuff everyone else was doing. It just, the level wasn't there as far as the like the creativeness, the extreme, the power behind the strikes. Like there were only a few people that were really competitive in that division, like myself, like Jarrett Liker, even like earlier on, Justin Eaton, Mike Baker, and then they started doing other things. So the non-bladed division became pretty small. And when Matt wasn't there, it was just guys doing bow. You know, I was able to separate myself differently. And then it was the appreciation of like, well, this guy won his division. Now he's competing against Matt Kalman, you know, like Mark, guys like that, Rudy. And they were able to appreciate what I was doing a little bit more because they already saw like, all right, well, he already won. He must be good. So I think just that helped also in my transition. But, you know, it's just the evolution of the sport. Things change and you have to just grow with it. And it is what it is. But yeah, if it wasn't for Nate kind of digging all that stuff into me and those long hours of practice, and I owe all of that stuff to him, and I routinely make sure people know that.
Yeah, that's another one of the things that I want to get into. You talk about, you know, setting yourself apart in that deep of a division, primarily by being unique, by doing something, by having a style that nobody else had. That's why I tell a lot of my students now, is that like, if you want to be successful, you've got to create your own unique style. You know what I mean? Because even, like you mentioned, part of it because you're shorter or whatever, watching you and Nate do bow, for me personally, I can watch the both of you and know that it's the same style, but at the same time, there's something that's unique about each one of you. Like, I would never say that your forms look the same, but I can tell that the style is there. And one of the things that makes that connection easier is one of my favorite sync forms of all time, tall guys with sticks. So maybe a little story. How did that get started? What was the motivation to start doing sync? And what was that like, having that opportunity to work on that?
Yeah, when Nate and I were really working hard together, we would start. He would help me put together forms and make the blueprint, and like most of my students would know, he kind of like learned the form and taught it to me. So we would end up doing it together. So he would put all the sections together, and then he's like, "All right, we'll just kind of follow along with me." And he literally taught me form as if it was he was the black belt instructor and I was the yellow belt student. Like he was doing it, I was copying him until I got it, and then he'd be able to turn around and watch me and pick it apart. And then it was, repetition, repetition. But he basically knew everything that I was doing as I was doing it, so we would practice it together. And I would try and keep up with his timing. And after a while, it was just like, we would do a combination, like as I was getting a little bit better, we would do it and like nail it at the same time, and like with tricks, with strikes, with the poses. And we would like laugh and be like, we should just do this in the division. Like, it would be awesome if we did team sync. And then we let it marinate a little bit. And then it was the next time I went up and trained, he was like, "All right, I got some ideas." I'm like, all right, cool. So to me, that was like I earned my keep when I was the chosen one. With Master Yoda, he got me going. So it was really cool, man. Cool experience. And then we were like, hey, whatever. We actually did it the first time at Twin Towers that year, which I believe was in like September or something like that. August, September is when Twin Towers used to run the event. So we competed, we won the division, and then we went to the nighttime show, competed against Daniel and Matt, and we sync dropped at the same time.
Oh, that's crazy.
And we were like, well, that's not good. So we were like, well, let's just do it. Let's go for it, whatever. So we did it, and similar outcome. We won the division, and I think I actually dropped on stage. But it was one of those things where we were competing against so many good competitors. And at the time, like Matt and Daniel were first doing their team sync, and they were so good, man. And you had the Team Extreme guys. Like, that division was nuts back in the day. It was like the division to do. It was the novelty division. So if you had two like really cool competitors, and it started becoming like someone who was in the adult division, someone who was in the junior division, and putting that stuff together, it was really cool to watch. Even like Casey and Lauren were doing it, and then they came out with doing it with the one bow, which was nuts. Man, that now you're saying I got to go back and watch all that stuff. It was really cool. But yeah, man, it was a fun time, and people really dug it. And the tall guys with sticks just came up. We were trying to figure out names, and we were just like, we're just two tall guys with sticks, man. Let's just call it that. So it just kind of stuck, and we were humorous about it, and we just wanted to have a good time.
That's awesome. So yeah, one more thing about Nate. I'll go into my story a little bit. So I remember the first U.S. Open that I ever won was 2010. And prior to that, I really hadn't been a very well-known competitor. I made stage a lot in 2009, but never won the overall. Earlier that year at Compete, 2010 Competes, I won my first overall there. So went into U.S. Open with one overall under my belt, which typically won't get you on stage at U.S. Open. But I got a little lucky that year, and I wound up being in a position to make it on stage. And on that Saturday, once I kind of knew that I was going to be on stage and had to figure out a plan, Nate was still around. And I remember being super intimidated of Nate because of how big he was. So it was like super scary for like little me to go and talk to him. But that's what I did, because I had the fantail in my form, which I'd basically stolen from like YouTube videos, which is the leaning over palm spin done behind the back.
Yeah.
And Nate always did the super cool variation, which was to take it from that palm spin, extend the arm, and actually stand all the way up into a palm spin without the bow ever stopping moving. And I was like, I got to know how to do that. If I can do that tonight, I'll win. Like, there's no way I won't win if I do that tonight. And so I went up to Nate and I was like, hello, sir. Can you teach me this move? I want to try to use it tonight. And I think he was a little surprised that I wanted to use it that night. But no, he broke it down for me, did a great job breaking it down. I learned it in maybe 10 or 15 minutes. and went on and did it on stage and was fortunate enough to be able to win that U.S. Open. So Nate played a huge part in me being able to secure that first major title that I won, because I firmly believe it was that trick that kind of helped put me over the top. I remember that was a really good Division II. It was against Mackenzie Emery, who was kind of the favorite to win the division that night. Right. That was like when she had just come out, and she was one of those people that like from day one, everybody knew she was going to be good. And so when we were kids, she was the one to beat. I think Austin Crane may have been in the mix. I don't remember exactly who else was in the division, but I mean, it was really cool to have that experience. And that was another thing, like growing up, is that like I always wanted, because you mentioned Lauren and Casey sync, I always wanted that opportunity to get to do sync with Lauren and try to continue that trend. But also it turned out Lauren and I wound up being very stylistically different. Sure. And on top of that, Lauren also got hurt before we would have really had the opportunity to do that. She had I believe it was an ACL tear that took her out. But on the flip side of that, it was really cool getting the opportunity years later to do sync with Jake, who, even though is not my student, quote unquote, he's always been like a little protege of mine. I've kind of taken him under my wing and tried to help him in his career as much as I could along the way. So it was cool getting that experience. So just one more thing about the bow stuff before we switch into some other topics. One thing that I always noticed and admired about you and Nate was the fact that like there was almost never, if not just never, any throws in the forms. And it was one thing that you actually emphasized in some of your intros, right? When you would introduce yourself, was it no flips, no tricks, and no throws, just bow. So talk a little bit about the motivation for that. Was that one of Nate's philosophies? Just get into that a little bit and why you guys made that stylistic, strategic, whatever it was, made that choice.
I think a lot of that got instilled by Nate also. Well, for one, he always, no matter what building he was in, he always had low ceilings. So I think that played a role in him never really releasing the bow. But he was always a very, very combat related. So like people who have trained with me with bow, they know that whenever I'm watching them or critiquing them or kind of teaching them or whatever it may be, it's always combat driven. It's like, all right, who are you striking here? What are you doing? Why are you changing this angle? Why are you doing that? It's not all about like, okay, we're going to do up, down, side, side, cross, cross, and then like we're going to do something else. Like it's always, all right, I got to finish this person. Now this person's attacking me here. I got to go there. So there's no time to release your bow when you're in combat. So for us, I think it was always just like hard style, and it was a fight. Sorry, my cat's wrecking.
No, you're good.
So I think it was just all about the hard style and just being able to always make it about a fight. And that's where a lot of those body rolls, people, like I was saying before, those are actually spear moves. So they would transition into further striking, stabbing, things like that, cutting. And that's, I think, where people don't recognize it. But it transitioned well to the bow, where that became our flair, even though for a spear, that's tradition. So we were able to use that, manipulate it into our creative bow forms, and it looked cool and it made us flashy and unique and different. But yeah, that's really what it was about.
Right, and I totally get where you're coming from on the the body rolls leading into spears and being moves that you could actually do in combat as transitions and everything. That's a really cool perspective. It's interesting because a lot of people don't understand like why I release as much as I do. And so like I'm not the one who popularized releases, right? You know that. But just for the listeners, like everybody sees me doing all the releases now. That didn't start with me. I mean, back in the day you had Casey, who I believe Casey was the first one to ever do a release with the flick release and then right into the front stance, right? Again, quickly going from the trick technique into the martial arts technique. And then bow staff tricking was taken to another level as far as releases go with guys like Corey Lutkus, Billy Ledger, that generation of guys doing some crazy stuff. And then just to tell the origin story of like, because I consider myself to be the first person to put long release combos together, right? So with the generation of like Corey, you would see 2 or 3 releases done back to back, normally connected by a body roll technique. Like Corey had his popular the Scarecrow, which was which actually that might have been one of Nate's. Did Nate make up Scarecrow originally?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Corey had a lot of influence with Nate and I as well, because Corey was younger coming up. And we've definitely had some training sessions, and Corey was pretty innovative though. I think he was the first one that kind of did that as a goof off in practice. I actually think that was in one of the dance studios. We might have all been together, and we were like, dude, that was crazy. And then we started practicing it. So we would all bounce ideas off of each other. But yeah, Corey was always a little bit off into that more like creative throw, like flair type of scene. So I think that's where that came from. But yeah, he's definitely had some training sessions with us as well. Corey's a man.
Yeah, he is. He's awesome. I loved watching him coming up and going back and watching his videos now. But like with Corey's generation, right? So you would see 2 or 3 releases in a combo. But even back then, like bow forms were primarily straight line forms for the most part. Like everybody kind of went a straight line. And one of the things that I found, because when I was first trying to find success, I was always competing against trickers. It was when combo tricking, like extreme tricking, had become the standard in sport karate, right? Guys like Micah Carnes at the time in the junior division, Jacob Pinto in the junior division, obviously in the adults, Matt and Mark. And so you started to see extreme kicking combos becoming the standard. And what set them apart from historically traditional creative bow forms was this sense of movement, right? There was the trick combo that would go from the right side all the way to the left side. They'd work their way up into the corner. There was the corner pass. So there was all this movement with the difficulty that made the forms unique. And so the reason that I started doing as many releases as I do and doing them in combination, where it's kind of, I'm going to do all my strikes here and then all my tricks here and then back to all my strikes, and where it's kind of segmented into flip-flopping between here's the strikes and here's the tricks, was out of necessity to try to show that a bow guy could keep up with the difficulty level and the movement of the trickers. And so that's why like the first combo, like the opening combo that I do coming across the front of the ring from right to left, is something that I started doing in 2010, was part of the reason I started finding success in 2010. And it's because I was able to get that movement that bow guys hadn't really gotten before. So it's just, I could geek out about this all day and just talk about bow staff history and like why different eras did different things. It's just so cool to me.
And that's cool to hear too, because like you could really see that what you did, you put a lot of thought into what you do, which a lot of people don't do. They study, copy, and it's like regurgitate. That's all it is. It's just copy, repeat until it doesn't work anymore, and then they fall off the face of the earth. But you can see that like you're someone that's going to be around for a long time because you've been influenced, and you go back and you study and you learn, and you not only just like, okay, I want to do a move like that, but it's like, all right, why was this guy successful? How do I translate that to what I do? So there's another level of like understanding and appreciation of what you do, and I think that's what made you successful. Now I got a question for you. We're going to turn the script. I'm interviewing you now. Did you find, because I always saw from the people that I was around, when you came onto the scene and started winning, there was a lot of hate flying around on Jackson Rudolph. It's like, he's not a real bow competitor. He doesn't strike. He doesn't do this. He's a baton twirler. Like, how did you deal with all of that? Because I know it had to come around to you. And I think I was one of the few people in mind that was like, he's not doing it because like that's all he knows how to do. Like, I've seen Jackson's traditional form. The kid can strike. Like, I know that. I think he's doing it because he has to, and he's winning. So if the judges are having him win with that, why would he stop? Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I think I was one of the few people who weren't Jackson Rudolph haters, and I was trying to like convince the masses, like, just let it go. It's evolution. But how did you deal with that? Because that's got to be hard. You were young, man. People were all like, oh, he's no good. He's this, he's that. So where did that come from on you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of that, man. And first of all, thank you. I mean, that means the world coming from you. I still remember being a kid, and when some of that hate was coming out, I still remember, your words of encouragement. You always supporting me, and it's part of what made me such a big fan of you is that you didn't have to, take the time or the energy to say those things about me, and you did, and I really appreciate that. But yeah, to answer your question, I think it was a couple of things. It was out of necessity, like I was talking about. Like the difficulty needed to be there to be competitive. And then you mentioned, how much I think about and how much I plan my routines. That was one of the first things that I did. So I'm going to peel back the curtain here a little bit. When I first came up with the idea for that form with all those releases in it, and I showed it to Lauren, who was my coach, she hated it. Like she was not a fan of it. She didn't want to see all the releases. And as much as I respected her opinion and I knew that she knew what was right, I was like, there was just something in my heart telling me like, no, I got to try it. I need to try it once and I need to see what happens. And one of the things that kind of kept me confident throughout, that phase of hearing all the naysayers and the most common insult being that he's a baton twirler, right? As I started to hear all that, I think that my early success with that concept, with that form, is what kind of kept my chin up. Because I remember the first tournament that season, that was the year that Lone Star was the first tournament of the season. And I remember Joe Greenhall was my center judge, who everybody knows, tough judge, but also knows his bow, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Joe was my center. And I go out and I run this new form, and I'm hitting the whole thing. I get to the last section where the hardest tricks have always been, and then I drop in the last section. And Joe, as my center judge, clapped his hands and yelled a curse word when I dropped. And so that was the moment where I was like, okay, he liked that, you know what I mean? Yeah. So I've got something here. So next division, I turned around, I hit the form, and Joe gave me a 10. And I'm like, all right, I'm doing what's right here. Went to runoffs, either stumbled, dropped, something happened, didn't win the runoffs, but then came back at the next tournament, which was Compete, where I was actually able to turn it into some wins. Because Compete came, that was a really good Compete Nationals for me. I won traditional forms and traditional weapons grands at that tournament as well for the runoffs grands. Then made it to stage with the CMX bow form. That was also the year that everything had been 17 and under for the grands. So it was 17 and under traditional weapons, 17 and under CMX weapons. And that was also back when they did the gold medallion challenge for the juniors, where the winners of all four of those would go against each other. So this was
one of the few awards I've never won.
Oh yeah, it's one of the few that I'm blessed to say that I was able to be in the right time at the right place to be able to get it. But yeah, so and it wasn't just getting that award; it was the division that I did it in. Because the way that everything turned out, I won my second career overall, and then went on to that round. And in that round, it was me and like 16 or 17-year-old Micah Carnes in his prime doing extreme forms, and I'm like, okay, the entire purpose of this form was to beat Trickers. If there's any time that I need to try to prove this, it's right now. And I was able to, and there were other great competitors in that division too. Jacob Ellis, back in the heat of when like creative traditional forms was a big thing, where you would make up your own traditional form and perform it. Jacob Ellis was doing that style. Shaheen Jahanvash was in that grand doing his traditional double sword form. So it was a super deep grand, and everybody older than me, and I was able to win. And so I think that early success was one of the things that helped me keep my chin up. I was like, well, it obviously works. Exactly like you were saying, the judges are rewarding it. So if the judges reward it, I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep taking it to the next level. And I think that that's what I stuck with. And then the other thing is that, like, you mentioned how much I planned my forms. Every single time that I put together a new variation of that bow form, which is, obviously has influence on the bow form that I do today, I always made sure that the number of actual strikes in the form was greater than the number of actual tricks, and that the number of strike combos was at least equal to or greater than the number of trick combos. So it was like, and ultimately that's why I had to start designing forms that way, where it's like strike combo, trick combo, strike combo, trick combo, strike combo, trick combo, done. Because it lays it out there like, here's the strikes, here's the tricks that go with it, and it makes it a little bit easier to see the strike content in there.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, like I said, I could talk about this for hours. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna move on because I know a lot of our listeners. Oh, go ahead. I see you got something else.
I think that's just a teachable moment here. That great change doesn't come without sacrifice or controversy, right? Mm-hmm. So for some of the younger listeners that are hearing all of this, or the younger parents that are there, or instructors who are coaching their kids, like, it's okay to do something different and go against the grain, because that's what moves society forward. That's what moves your training forward, the ability to teach and learn. Like, you have to be able to be that person. And you were a trailblazer in the sport, man. So even at a young age, you were able to say, you know what, something a little bit deeper is telling me I got to do this. So for the young listeners, those of you who have that feeling, if something's a little different, you got to stick with it and be true to yourself. And that's what's going to make waves in the sport. So that's good teachable moment there. So I'm glad we touched on that.
Awesome. And thank you, man. I mean, like I said, coming from you, that just means the world. And I really do appreciate it. So thank you very much.
For sure, man.
So now we're going to go ahead and take a hard shift into point fighting. And I want to start talking a little bit about your personal history. So a hot topic in sport karate right now, made an even bigger deal by guys like Alex Reyes, Point Fight Alive, who's doing a great job providing more coverage for our sport. Sport Martial Arts has really revved up their stuff and trying to promote and get more media out there, which is awesome. Yeah. But right now, fighters in particular moving around various teams is a big deal. And you don't see it as much in the forms and weapons divisions. Like we talked about, we're in an age of specialization. So you got your forms and weapons guys and you got your fighters. And it seems like the forms and weapons guys are staying pretty still. The fighters are moving around a whole lot. We can get your opinion on kind of the state of that and what you feel about that. But before that, I want to hear a little bit about your journey with different teams. I just personally remember you fighting when I first came on. I think you were fighting for CJB. Then later on to Full Circle, which was a powerhouse for several years there. And then, of course, most recently fighting for Impex. So just tell us a little bit about your story with teams, what led you to certain teams. I know there might be some history with Paul Mitchell that you might want to get into. Because that was one thing that for me as a kid, I always thought that the best fighters are on Paul Mitchell and Ross is one of the best fighters. So as a kid, I never put that together. Now I know there's more politics and stuff that goes into it. But I'll let you take it away as far as just your story with teams and everything.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot to unpack there. So just my basic, just to touch on what you first said there with fighters switching teams. It's a big difference between being on a team as a fighter and being on a team as a forms and weapons competitor. There's a lot more that goes into it because you have to be around these people. You have to fight in conjunction with these people. So it's not where if I'm on a team and my only responsibility on the team is performing my open hand form or my traditional form or my weapons form or whatever, my chemistry with the team is null and void. No one has to like me, and I don't have to like them. I don't got to get along with anyone because nothing they do influences how I compete, right? But as a fighter, if you don't have chemistry, that team crumbles, without a doubt. And you've seen it, I'm sure, with as much as you watch fighting, you see it all the time. So chemistry is huge. So I don't mind if someone's like, you know what, I'm not feeling it here. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times it's based around money. They only went to this team because they're going to be sponsored a little bit more. You know what? Maybe why don't you ask that fighter how they actually felt on that team? Maybe it's not about the money. I've gone to teams that I've gone from teams that had a lot of money to going on my own and paying for it by myself. And I've also been on a team that had sponsorship where we lost sponsorship and the team stuck together because we had so much faith in each other and the coach that we knew something was going to come up eventually. So chemistry is everything. So if you're a fighter out there and you're like, you know what, I'm not feeling it right now, don't be afraid to leave whatever sponsorship you have, because in the long run, we're not going to become rich doing this sport. So if you're doing it for money, you're already in the wrong hole. You're going to stay in that hole for a long time. So do it for the passion of it. Do it for your own personal growth, and you'll see the results, in your performance. But so as a kid, I was on a couple different teams. I was on WKF. I was on a team called J. Phillips. I had some sponsorship from my dad's union, so we were the Teamsters. So it was a cool red and black gi with gold. It was pretty sweet when I was a kid. And then later on in my adult career, I was just kind of representing myself and something that we put together called Team NYC. It was myself, Jotty Tension, Hakeem Walker, Kodak Ray, the four of us.
That's sick, by the way.
Yeah, it was pretty dope.
Yeah.
Being involved with those people, and like to talk about my relationship with those guys is a whole nother hour and a half long podcast. But yeah, I met Jotty when I was 16, and he took me to the next upper echelon of sport karate. But team wise, so I was representing NYC as a fighter coming up. I entered the adult division in 2005. Went to the AKA Grand Nationals first term when I was 18. And I was representing Team NYC. Now, when after all that happened, I had heard, I went to Compete Nationals the next year. And at Compete Nationals, I beat Greg Betlak and BJ Carnahan. So I beat BJ in the division. Greg Betlak was on Paul Mitchell at the time. I beat him for first place in the division. Damon Gilbert was hurt, so he had to bow out of the Grands. I ended up losing to Jack Felton. So I beat a couple Paul Mitchell guys right off the bat, won my division again after winning the Warrior Cup my first time out. So I already had a whole lot of buzz around me. Mm-hmm. The rumor was that Paul Mitchell was looking at me and was interested and wanted to pick me up. Now, I already knew that, like, the whole thing with Jotty, and when he left the team, there was not so much animosity, but he was like, you know what, Paul Mitchell's not quite what it used to be. So there's going to be other possibilities for you. Now, leading up to Ocean State Grand Nationals, this is where it gets kind of juicy. I get a phone call from Jotty saying, hey, man, Don Rodriguez wants us to send a 3-man team to Paris for Waco. And I was like, sweet, I'm in. Like, first, I'm 18 years old, have an opportunity to compete at Waco World Championships, go to Paris. Like, I've still never been to Paris. So he was like, yeah, I'm going to tell Don I want the team to be me, you, and Jason Borelli. And I was like, man, that's going to be ridiculous. Like, no one will ever even come close to beating us. And I think Jack was supposed to be the fourth, Jack Felton. So I was like, all right, sweet. So in my mind, I'm like, all right, not going to Ocean State, I'm going to Paris because it was the same weekend. Jotty calls me back like a day later, and he was like, hey, Don Rodriguez said you can't go to Paris. And I was like, why? And he was like, well, they're watching you for Paul Mitchell, and they really want you to be at the Ocean State Grand Nationals. So he doesn't want you going to Paris. He wants you at Ocean State. And I was like, that's messed up. Like, I don't care about Ocean State. Like, I want to go to Paris, man. So right off the bat, I had a little bit of like I'm going to stick it to them real good. I still, to this day, I have no idea how this happened. I don't know how this gentleman got my number. But if Ocean State is on a Friday, on a Wednesday afternoon, I get a call from Mike Conroy. And he was like, hey, I'm putting a team together, just a team fight at Ocean State. Do you want to fight? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll fight. No mention of CJB, no nothing. Now, Mike Conroy was the coach of CJB when they were, at their peak, and then they lost their sponsorship. So the team folded and was gone for years. So I get to Ocean State Grand Nationals. Another funny story about the guy that I beat at the Warrior Cup, Ryan McGriff. We were like not super close because we just fought. So we walk into the elevator at the same time. We press the same floor number, and we were both like standing on opposite sides of the elevator. And I'm looking at him, he's looking at me. I'm like, "You going to Mike's room?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "You?" I'm like, "Yeah." We were all pissed off. Like, now we gotta be teammates. So we get in there, and it's me, Ryan, and this guy, Rene Perrault, who speaks no English. He was French, French-Canadian. So he's sitting there. We're all just kind of silent. Mike's like, I got to go to the bathroom, and then we'll talk. So he goes to the bathroom. He comes out with all the CJB bags, and we're like, oh, my God, is this real? And he was like, yeah, this is the new team. Welcome. And then he's like, Jason will be here a little later. And that was the team. And then that event, we went out and beat Paul Mitchell, and I was like, I'm in 100%. Like, I just felt so much like between the animosity and then between the like, oh God, I wanted to go to Paris and it got taken away from me. And now I had this opportunity to be on CJB, which I always loved CJB. I was like, yeah, I'm in. And then we rolled with that. So that was the beginning. CJB then turned into, we lost sponsorship again. And then Clement Poulin, who ran the Quebec Open before David and Sam took over, or David and Claire and Sam took over, he said that he was going to help us out, came out of his own pocket a lot, and sponsored the same team, same group. We added a couple Canadians to the team, obviously, because Clermont was helping us out. But that was sponsored by Wasuru, which was a gear company up there in Canada, which still exists, I believe. So at that point, we had added people like Jason Grenier, Hamed Ferruzzi, Damian Rodriguez. So we added a couple new faces. After a while, Clermont couldn't really support that, and we understood. And at that point, Mike was like, listen, you're going to get offers from other teams. I remember we were at the Diamond Nationals, and we had a conversation after everything. And it was like, he was like almost in tears, like, I can't support this anymore. You guys can go and do whatever you want to do. And that was kind of the end of the conversation. He walked away, and I remember myself, Ryan McGriff, Hamed Ferruzzi, we all sat down, and we were like, we're not going anywhere. We're going to figure this out. So we fought almost a whole year on our own, just staying together again, because of that chemistry, man. It was really important. No one was beating us. We were just happy. We were confident in each other. We loved each other. Ryan used to come and stay at my house and train and stuff. It was crazy. And then it was Compete Nationals. I met a gentleman by the name of Tom Kelly. And Tom would always come up to me and my dad and, say how much he enjoyed watching me compete. And he was saying, like, what is it going to take for me to get you on the team, full circle? And I was like, no, man, I'm with my guys. This is where I want to be. Because at the time, Full Circle was just like a regional team from Florida. They didn't have any superstars or anything like that. And every single tournament, Tom was like, what do I got to do? What do I got to do? And finally, it was right after the Ocean State. I had just won the Fighting Grands at that event. And he came up to me. He's like, Ross, what do I have to do to get you on the team? I was like, Tom, I love you, man. I'm sorry. I was like, if you want me, you got to take my whole team with me. And he's like, who do I have to talk to? And I was like, okay, talk to that guy over there. His name is Mike Conroy. And 15 minutes later, Mike came back. He said, all right, we got a new sponsor. It's Full Circle. And Tom Kelly literally took all 10 of us and sponsored all of us. And we were just like, the way your face was just then.
Yeah, that's wild.
Like, really? And it just showed that, like, just by sticking together and, like, trusting each other and trusting our coach, that good things were going to come, and it did. So fast forward, Full Circle, in my opinion, one of the best teams ever. We were, there was no one that really beat us. We beat Paul Mitchell. We beat the All-Stars. Very, very infrequently that we lost individually or as a team. And then a couple things happened. The team started getting really big, and Tom's idea of what he wanted the team to be about kind of changed. Originally it was, we want to be the best team in the world. And then, he became very passionate about helping people and getting more people involved with the team. And, from an elite standpoint, it was very hard to go from a small group of, 10 to 12 people who were all really successful to a team of like 25, 30 people where it was just kind of hard to corral. So at that time, I decided I was going to leave. And do my own thing. I was getting older already, and I wanted to surround myself with just a crew of just people that were going to be gung-ho about winning all the time, not just happy to have a uniform. And this is where the Paul Mitchell story comes back again. So at the time, I was dating Nicole Palland, who was on Paul Mitchell. She had left similar to when I left, and she trained a lot with Chris Rappold. So I would come up, I would train with Chris, and it's funny how the conversation was the same. What do we got to do to get you on Paul Mitchell? And I was like, all right, we can have a conversation about it. So I went up. I remember we trained, and then after the training, I went up into Chris's office. I don't know if you've ever been to. Oh yeah, you've been to.
I have, yeah.
The upstairs. I was in the office. Got the big like round table type of thing. He sat down, and he got Damon Gilbert on speakerphone, and he handed me a pad so I could take some notes. And I'm talking with Chris and Damon, and he said, all right, well, what do we got to do? To get you on Paul Mitchell. And I wrote 3 things down. I wrote, was it 3? No, I wrote 2 things. I wrote Trevor Nash, Mike Pombero. Mm-hmm. Those were the 2 things I wrote on the paper, and I slid it back to him. I said, this is what I want. I said, if you can give me Mike Pombero and Trevor Nash, I will fight for you guys. And right away it was like, oh, well, Trevor just had a baby, and he opened the schools, and Mike is really busy. We don't know if he's coming back. I was like, all right, sorry, guys, can't have it. I was like, at the time, I was already beating Alex Lane and Greg Betlak and Elias Lemon, and like we just weren't. That wasn't the crew, you know. Like if I came to that team, like yeah, I'm sure we would have won, but I don't think I would have been happy. I wanted to be around people that I was going to learn from and just surround myself with greatness. And the only two people on Paul Mitchell at the time that I knew could support that dream of mine was Mike P, Uncle Mike, as I call him,
Right.
and Trevor Nash, who is also one of the few guys I've never beaten. So that's what I wanted. I don't know if that story's ever come out. You might, or actually, I did. I said that on a Travis Plottin podcast once. But yeah, they couldn't make that happen. So I was like, all right, guys, sorry, not happening. And then, shortly after that, Jason Chen came to us with the proposal of Impex, and we jumped on that, and it was that ever since, man.
And yeah, it's really cool hearing that perspective, because going back to something that you said all the way in the beginning of this segment was talking about how I guess culturally it's a bit different between the fighters and the forms guys, because the fighters are a lot more dependent upon that chemistry. And it sounds like it was just you trying to make sure, especially at that second stage of your career, making sure the chemistry stayed right, making sure that you had people around you that you believed in, that they believed in you, and that you could have made it happen that way. So, but yeah, it's really cool to hear that perspective. It's unique it's funny because I remember when I was first wanting to be on Paul Mitchell, remembering how like Ocean States was always a tournament that was circled on the schedule, because it's like, all right, if I go to Ocean States and I beat Paul Mitchell's guys at Ocean States, they don't have a choice but to pick me up, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And ultimately, that's what happened the year that I got on the team. The year that I got on the team, I ended up beating who was the guy that was one of their top weapons guys at the time. I won't bother to say who it was, but one of their top weapon guys at the time. I went and beat him in the runoffs, then won the overall on stage at Ocean States. And I think that was one of the things that kind of made me a bit more noticeable to them, was when that happened. But yeah, really cool to hear that perspective. And so now, we kind of started that conversation with the trend in sport karate of moving teams, and you did a very good job of explaining kind of why that is, and that there's more to it than just people jumping ship and going around places. But now let's speak just a little bit more in general. What's your take kind of on the overall state of point fighting? What steps need to be taken to make it bigger? What things do you like right now? What things do you not like that you see right now? Just kind of whatever you want to talk about the current state of point fighting.
It's interesting. That's kind of a loaded question. Obviously, I love point fighting. Sometimes I find it a little hard to watch. And the reason I find it hard to watch is because it's a level of uneducation of the people who are responsible for judging it. And like there are a couple people who are phenomenal judges, but then sometimes it gets kind of dampened by people who are around them in the corners that don't quite know what they're looking at. And it's just a lack of education of like, this is what a good technique is. This is why it should work. People that keep up with the sport, the sport changes, evolution happens, and if you don't keep up with it, how can you possibly judge it and understand it? So I think that's where it's really declining, because the techniques have changed. The game is super fast and it's always evolving. So from a martial arts standpoint, I love it, but it's hard to watch because sometimes you're just looking at it, it's like, man, this is just not what it used to be. And I'm not saying we need to go bare knuckle and draw blood at every tournament, but there should be solid contact. You should be looking where you're going. It should be clear who the point is given to or not. And if you're not sure, then just say it's a clash. There's a lot of stigma of like, I have to make a decision. And I think that's where if we just educated judges a little bit more, we'd see more like the judging, the level of judging should force the fighters to be better. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think right now, like the fighters, some of them just aren't quite getting to that next level of what they are as a fighter because they're being held back by, they can get away with poor technique. So they're not challenging themselves, and that's why you see the same people winning all the time. You see guys like Avery, guys like Cam, Jack Felton. It's the same when they're in the building. It's like, well, those guys are going to win. And it's just because they have that different mentality behind them, So that's why you see that, and they're consistent and they win so much. Those are, Avery's probably the best in the world, in my opinion. Morgan, best in the world. I'm not saying that because they're my teammates. I'm saying that because you just look at it. Just look at the level, look at the intensity. and they just make sure that everything they do is perfect. There's nothing left in the judge's hands, and that's just the way it is. And I think when more people start taking that attitude into their competition, then that's when we're going to see some more evolution in the sport.
Absolutely, yeah. Like you mentioned Avery. I've actually had a little bit of a close. I wouldn't say a closer relationship because I don't really know Avery, but he's one of those guys that I'll see at tournaments, and he always tells me good luck. I always tell him the same thing.
Yeah.
Our success is kind of aligned over the past several years, but it's like following him on social media. He's always in the gym. He's always making himself better. And same thing with Morgan too. You know what I mean? That's part of what makes them as good as what they are. And I agree. They are the standard right now. Those as well as the guys like you mentioned, like Cam and Jack. And it's because of that mentality. So that's a cool way to look at it. I like that a lot. About the judging, that is one thing that some of the regional circuits are starting to do a better job of. Like Promac's starting to do judges certifications now, so you're told what to look for, which is great. So just very, very briefly, just because I know it's another kind of hot topic off the script here, just about rules and everything and about what holds the fighters back, what doesn't. I know that in your career you were known for a lethal defensive sidekick. So what's your opinion on the body kick rules? 2 points or 1 point?
No, I think a body kick should be 1 point. And I think the fact that I was such a strong side kicker that was most of my game for me to say, yeah, give me 1 point for that. Don't give me 2 points. I think people should take note of that. I think 1 point for a body kick because for the punchers, now a puncher has to work twice as hard to get the same amount of work done. And now you look at, all right, so you hit me with one side kick, one bad call, and then all of a sudden now I'm down 4 points and I got to work extra hard. It doesn't even out. And especially with the rate that judges are just calling like kind of half bent side kicks. I know Alex posted something the other day of like, a defensive side kick's more of a back kick, so the knee doesn't have to be extended. Well, yeah, but there's got to be some type of structure and reason for what we're doing and what we're calling. So from that perspective, like it's a side kick. It should be extended, So I think 1 point body kicks, I think it would make things more exciting. I think you would see people attacking a little bit more because they're not afraid of the 2 point side kick. I think a lot of the reasons why people don't blitz as full-heartedly as they used to is because now a side kick is 2 points. So there's fear of being down on the scores. So if you can neutralize that a little bit by taking the value away, I think you would see more action, you'd see more volume. You wouldn't see these 3-1 scores at the end of a 2-round grand championship fight, and I think that's why it's just so boring. People are trying to be perfect all the time. Just go for it, and if you make the scoring system a little bit lower, I think we would see that. You kick someone in the head. If you kick me in the head, take it. You deserve 2 points. If you jump, spin, and kick me in the face, you deserve 3 points. That shouldn't happen to me on a regular basis, but you're getting these guys that are hitting home runs by sitting back, throwing side kicks, to the body. I think it's a little skewed.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good take. Yeah, I appreciate that, and maybe that'll stir some comments to pop up in the comment section down below that you can get on there and debate with. But no, I agree with that. That's especially hearing that perspective and hearing that argument. That makes total sense to me. So last thing here, we're going to go ahead and move forward from the point fighting into what you're currently doing, which is your professional kickboxing career in glory.
Yeah.
So what are some of your goals for that moving forward? We'll start kind of general there.
There's really only one goal to have when you become a professional fighter, and it's to strap that belt around your waist. So, I don't think that's something that's happening in the near future. I've definitely got to climb the ranks a little bit and get myself moving in that right direction. I've got some fight news coming really soon. I can't announce it yet until I get my official contract, but it's looking like the end of March. So keep your eyes peeled on my social media, my Instagram, all that stuff. I'll be posting, and you'll be able to see me and follow me. There's a good chance it'll be international, so keep your eyes open. We're gonna make sure we put sport karate on the map. But yeah, man, I just want to be. I want to be recognized as the best in the world at this time, and again, I don't want to be compared to the people before me or necessarily remembered for the people after me, but I'm looking at all the competition now and how I stack up, and I think I do a good job of leading up to that, and I just want to be recognized as the best in the world. And I think that's a cool thing to be able to say in something like kickboxing, where it's legit. You know, there's a couple different leagues, and you can kind of see, like, in my opinion, when it comes to kickboxing, like, Glory is the one. They're the most international. They get the most publicity. They're on the biggest platforms of viewership. So for me to beat the best guys that are ranked in the world in that division, that's incredible to me. So that's what I want, and that's what I'm going to get. It's just a matter of when it's going to happen. So I got some exciting things coming up this year. Not only in that part of my life, but my personal life. Like I'm getting married later this year, so just bought a house at the end of this year. So a lot of good things are happening. But it's all about staying focused, staying driven, and just moving to the next stage of my life.
That's awesome, man. I'm excited for you. I'll certainly be tuning into that. And if there was anybody that I was going to put money on to climb that ladder and be able to get that belt, it'd be Ross Levine.
Thank you, man. Appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Always got my support. So now as we kind of wrap up here, anything else, any type of closing message that you want to send, anything like that, feel free.
Well, I think really, and I've been saying this a lot in all of my podcasts and my interviews that I've been doing, I'm fortunate that a lot of people are kind of seeking me out and want to hear me talk and want to hear my story and what I have to say. But I really can't thank the sport karate world enough for staying on my back and supporting me and really showing me a lot of love through all of this transitional period that I've been going through with kickboxing. You know, a lot of other people have done it and tried it before me. I think my connection to the sport karate world is a little different than everybody else's. But the amount that people have stuck by my side and support me and buy tickets to come see my shows no matter where they are, and always reaching out to me and still calling me up for seminars. Like, I still love to teach and be a part of that community. I actually worked out with one of your students on Saturday, Dagan from down in Texas.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I got to work with him on his bow, which was sweet. So yeah, check out with him in a little bit. I'll have some cool words for you. But yeah, man, just the love and support I get from the sport karate community is huge. And I literally take you guys and put you on my back for every single fight, because the experiences that I've got in from sport karate are carrying directly over into the ring, where there's no competition anxiety. I'm comfortable. I'm happy. People are there supporting me. I feel at home in there, and it's because of all the support from this genre of karate. So I really appreciate it. Definitely keep following me. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, message me, talk to me, ask me questions, send me video clips. I'll critique them. I really don't care. I love that stuff. And yeah, just keep on the train, because we're going right to the top.
That's awesome, man. And thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. Like I said, you're somebody that's been a big inspiration to me, and it's an honor to be able to talk a little bit of history with you, talk about the current state of the sport. It's just, it's an honor. So thank you very much for your time, man.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me as the inaugural, host here, co-host with you. Anytime you want to do it again, man, I'm here to support you.
Absolutely. We'll do, man. And we'll be in touch, all right?
All right, brother. Be easy.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Later.
All right, guys. So that is the one and only, the legendary Mr. Ross Levine. That was awesome. I haven't gotten a chance to, obviously, I just sat through it. So I want to be able to go back and listen to this. But just going through that conversation, man, there's so many great little nuggets of information there to hold on to. Great words of wisdom from one of sport karate's great competitors, both with his influence in weapons as well as the greatness that he has shown in point fighting. So once again, Ross, when you tune in and listen to this little outro here, thank you so much for your time. I mean, we greatly appreciate it. And for my listeners, whoever you guys want to hear on the podcast next, if there's a guest that you guys want to hear from, anything like that, feel free to put that in the comments down below. If you got questions for Ross, he's on social media regularly. So if you got questions for him, leave it in the comments down below. We'll see if he gets any of those. And once again, thank you guys all just for tuning in. Very quickly, now the interview's over, just for tournament talk this week. We do have the Compete Nationals coming up next weekend. That's the next big NASCAR tournament, followed by the Irish Open coming up the weekend after that. So a lot of big tournaments coming up that I'll be discussing kind of as we get through those next couple of of tournaments. And once again, thank you guys all so much for tuning in. If you like the podcast, like it, share it, throw some comments down, Facebook, Instagram, all your social media. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been the Jackson Rudolph Podcast. See you next time.